Audio recording for this meeting has begun.
All right. Hello there. Welcome to D.A.M.E.S. This is D.A.M.E.S first webinar, and D.A.M.E.S stands for Differently Abled Mothers Empowerment Society, and aims at empowering mothers who are raising special needs children. So we do that by offering access to an online forum so that mothers can communicate with each other. We also offer weekly meditation, yoga, Pilates, and fitness classes, and educational opportunities like this webinar series. So our first webinar today is called What's the Science? And we'll go over tips and tricks for how we read scientific journal articles. So I myself am a mother of two children who have been diagnosed with autism. And I can tell you that I am always bombarded by people who are like, oh, have you tried this therapy? It's great. Or have you done this diet or this magic pill? Or, have you tried essential oils? And, all of this stuff. Everybody has a cure. And my first question to anybody is, what's the science? So I actually have a scientific background. And so, I'm always trying to figure out is what they're claiming backed by actual science, and is it good science or is it bad science? And so today we are going to be joined by Dr. Angela Safaro-Manconi, and she is going to take us through the process of how do we read and analyze scientific journal articles. Angela is herself a D.A.M.E. She is raising a special needs child, and I'm sure she'll talk to us a little bit more about that. And she's also an academic. So she has a bachelor's degree in anthropology from Arizona State University and a bachelor's degree in women and gender studies. She also has a master's degree and a PhD in anthropology that she got from Washington State University. Angela will also be hosting a video blog on D.A.M.E.S that is called What's the Science? And in it, she'll go over the latest scientific articles that are coming out, or as members have questions about different scientific principles, or if something comes out, like, can I, get her opinion on if this is a good claim, is this a bad claim, is this science done well? So she's going to be kind of there as a mentor to help us as we process and go through raising a child that has a disability, and to help us discern what's good science from what's bad science. So today that's kind of what her talk is going to be on, how to read and evaluate scientific journal articles and how to try to distinguish good science from bad science. So Angela, I will let you take it away.
Thanks, Michelle. I appreciate that. I'd also like to thank our attendees today because I'm really excited about D.A.M.E.S. I think what Michelle and her team are putting together is really going to be important for the special needs moms of our community. And when you get in on the ground floor of something like this, you can really help to mold it into what the community needs. This is my son, Dominic, and he decided to come visit. He'll probably be in and out throughout this presentation. So I am thrilled to be a part of D.A.M.E.S. So thank you, Michelle, for asking me to be part of the inaugural webinar. Okay, so my name is Angela, and I'm a native of Phoenix. As Michelle said, I have graduate degrees from Washington State University in cultural anthropology. And just as a little background to that, for some of you that maybe don't remember or have never known, cultural anthropology is not a hard science. Michelle's background is in hard sciences. Mine is more in social sciences. It's more akin to sociology or psychology. But nevertheless, we still try to follow the scientific method when applicable. And when I was doing my dissertation, I had to read reams and reams of paper from scientific journal articles. When I was contemplating what my research topic was going to be, I had to do research. I had to, as they say, look into the literature. And eventually, I had to learn a way of quickly evaluating papers, so that I could kind of filter through what was good for my research and what was not applicable at all. And as Michelle stated, as a special needs parent, once I told everyone about my son's ASD diagnosis, everyone started sending me New York Times articles about different things I should keep out of his diet, or things I should add to his diet, or over-the-counter remedies, different types of therapies. And for me, like Michelle said, I always try to find out what the science is behind it. Has there been a study, or is this just one person's anecdote of what helped her child? So to do a little bit more background, oh, there's another picture of my son, which you don't need because he showed his beautiful face. Click here. Let's review the scientific method. Now, I know most of us probably haven't looked at it since high school, or maybe even junior high in like a general science class. And I think now it's really important to remember what the scientific method is, because there seems to be a pervasive idea that doctors, people in the medical community, researchers aren't people to be trusted. And unfortunately, that's something that really needs to be combated, because most of these people are altruistic, okay? I really, truly believe that. And the scientific method itself is kind of like a moral checklist for scientists and researchers to stay honest, okay? It's rules for them to follow, or at least that they are expected to follow. Now, you can't say everyone is 100% altruistic all the time, but the scientific method is a way to mitigate any false claims by scientists or researchers. So the first step in the scientific method is to ask a question. Scientists have to think about, what do they want the answer to? What do we wonder about in the natural world? It can be something simple like, when I take a piece of pencil and I let go of it, it falls to the ground. Why does that happen? It can be, what temperature does water need to be to boil? And it can go all the way up to, how effective is a treatment for a child with cerebral palsy? Step two, the researcher, the investigator, the scientist needs to do some research. And that's what I had to do, right? I had to look through the literature, have other people research this same thing that I am now trying to research. How did they investigate? What were the ways in which their lab was set up to investigate? And this can give you ideas on how to do your own research, or what not to do, what didn't work. Step three is formulate a hypothesis. Now, this is a part where I think people get a little bit confused. All hypothesis is an answer to the question that you originally asked. So what does the scientist think should happen as an outcome to whatever their experiment is? And it doesn't have to be correct, meaning the end result doesn't have to prove that the scientist or research team was correct. In fact, it's great when it proves that they were wrong, because that's what science is about. Science is not about being right. It's about discovering things about the natural world. So most scientists have a hunch about what they think will happen when they conduct an experiment. But even if they don't, say they have no idea, what if we do this XYZ and ABC comes out? They don't know what's going to happen. It doesn't matter. They just pick something that might happen. Because again, it's not about being proven right. It's about collecting the data and looking at the hard data of something. Okay, so step four is the fun part. This is what all the scientists want to do. They want to run the experiment. So they drop the pencil on the ground, they heat up the water and take measurements, or they give a supplement to all the test subjects, and they set up a control group that gets a placebo. And then they, step five, record all their results. In this part, scientists will write down the good, the bad, the ugly, or the amazing that they see in their test results. Essentially, they just write down everything, anything that could have an effect on the outcome of their lab experiment. I think I went a little too far. And then step 6 is they draw a conclusion. And so they take all of that data and they write it up into a lab report. But after all of this scientific method is done, after they run and record their experiments, what do? Well, at this point, they write it up. And it's important to note that scientists do not live in a vacuum. They want to share any information that they've discovered with the international scientific community. Sorry, I have a little bit of a video going on in the background. Hi, sweetheart, you can sit here. Now, the reason they want to share this with the international scientific community can be for altruistic reasons. It can be because they want to help people with cancer, or it could be because they want to advance the study of their field of physics or chemistry. You can see the elephant. You can see it. I'll be done in one moment, okay? So, even in my field of cultural anthropology, I ran some pseudo experiments, and I wanted to share that with people as far as I could. And the easiest way for a member of the scientific community to share that information is to get published, or at least to try to get published. And what that means is, after an experiment is done, after a study is done and it's written up into a paper, they send it off to a scientific journal, a medical journal, for peer review. That means other people with PhDs, other people with similar backgrounds will look at that lab experiment or that research study and evaluate it for whether good science was done, whether people followed laboratory protocol, whether the data collected seems like it makes sense, or that it's true. And then oftentimes people have to rewrite it. They submit an article, and then a panel of scientists look at it and they say, you forgot to read this person's study or this research team's study, and they've already found this information. So you need to take it back, read all of this literature that has to do with your subject, rewrite it, and send it back to us. And that can happen a number of times. So these scientific journals don't just publish anything. It's not like a magazine. They don't just take an idea and say, this is science, and put it out. It is rigorously evaluated by a panel of scientists. And to have full disclosure, I've never had anything published. It's a hard process to get something published, and it was something that I didn't want to put the effort and time in to do. So I have never been published in a peer-reviewed article or journal. So now let's look at the different parts of a scientific article. They don't read like a typical article that you would find in a popular magazine. So I have the different parts listed out here on the slide. There's the abstract, which is kind of like a little summary. The introduction, which sets up the question, lets you know what questions the researchers are asking. Methods tells you how they tested those questions. The results are the results of those investigations. And the discussion interpretation helps you to make sense, or at least see how the researchers made sense of the results of their experiments. And the conclusion is often very helpful. It kind of does another summary of what was learned, but it also will give further questions for research. Research doesn't ever end. And a lot of people that don't have science backgrounds don't realize that. Science never ends. It can be retested and retested, and it can branch off into different questions. So at the end of every scientific article, there's always a section where the researchers put ideas for further research. How can we push this question even farther? Or what new questions have we found from our research? And I want to point out, now this goes back to what I mentioned about not necessarily trusting science or medicine. This little article that I have here, Mitochondria, Structure, Function, and Clinical Relevance, I thought was really interesting. If you notice, the author on this, the first author on this paper is Lucas McGeorge. And if you read that little introduction, it talks about midichlorians. And if you are a Star Wars geek like me, you know that midichlorians are made up molecules that are within all living things, binding us together. Yes, I'm a nerd. That help Jedi to have strong connection with the Force. So why is this published in MedCrave, the International Journal of Molecular Biology, when it's total bunk science? Well, a anonymous blogger from Discover Magazine wanted to show that there are journals out there that will publish anything without being peer reviewed. And that is something you need to look out for. At the end of this presentation, I'm going to give you 6 different valid medical journals that are highly renowned and have vigorous peer review, so that you won't run into something like this. So when I decided to evaluate the papers that I needed for my research, I came up with this reading order, because most people would think, oh, you read the abstract first because the abstract is a summary of the whole study. I found that that wasn't necessarily a good thing, because it wasn't telling me, an abstract doesn't tell you all you need to know about a research study. So my suggestion is to read the introduction first. Now the introduction will have all the questions or the question that the researchers are asking. And if you don't care about the answer to that question, you can skip that article, just move right along. If it's about red dye number 5 being taken out of a child's diet, and then they start speaking and your child is fully verbal, you don't care about that study. Next report. The second thing I would say you should read are the methods. How are they planning on testing these questions? Sample size is also very important. I'm going to talk a little bit more about sample size a little later. But sample size is incredibly important, because the number of participants or observations in a study directly correlates with how accurate a study is. And that's kind of a hard thing to wrap your mind around. So obviously larger samples are better, right? If you go out and take a survey of people, it's better to get a larger number than a small number, because if you only ask 2 people your question, then you're not really getting a good gauge of what the majority of people think. But if your sample size is too large, it reduces the margin. It is too large, it actually is bad as well. So there's kind of this sweet spot for doing research where your sample size is not too big, because that means almost nothing, and your sample size is not too small. Excuse me. Then after I look at the methods, I like to look at the results and the conclusions. That's pretty self-explanatory. How did it all work out? They ran the experiment, they got their data, and this is what came out. After that, I'll probably go back to data, but I'm more concerned with what the results were. And then I'll look at the references, which is at the very end. It's after the main body of the article. And that's because in references, it shows all of the other scientific journal articles that the researchers read before beginning their research. So remember, when a scientist is looking toward the literature, well, they tell you who they read before. So you can go back and say, okay, so you ran this experiment about this subject, but before you did that, these people ran these experiments about this similar subject. I want to read more about that too. So you might not find the answer that you're looking for in the journal article that you're reading right then, but you might find something, you might find gold in the references. You might find exactly what you want to know in the references. So always check the references as well. Okay, so a little bit more about sample size. As a special needs mom, as Michelle noted, people email you journal articles, things from the New York Times, things from popular magazines about different treatments for your child. So nerdy people like me like to tell jokes about an N of 1. So, and that's written out, as you can see on the screen, N equals 1, N of 1. And that just means there was only one subject in that research. So someone comes and tells you, my cousin's nephew's neighbor did this, and now this happened. Everything's better. You know, he has no more issues, no more problems. That's known as an N of 1. You have to be really careful about that. You don't know all the factors that are part of that particular subject's story. For instance, I am part of a group on Facebook that is interested in fasting, refraining from food for a specific amount of time for health and wellness. And it's a doctor's group. And a gentleman asked the group, hey, I just found out that I have pancreatic cancer. And my doctor suggested that along with my medical treatment, I try some fasting to see if I can get my body into autophagy, which has to do with sloughing off of old cells. It's a natural bodily process. And I need some help starting to fast. Can anyone give me some pointers? And a woman piped in really quickly, oh, my dad had cancer and he took this over-the-counter medication, which I'm not going to say, and his cancer was cured. And I just thought, how not helpful for this man. We don't know. She left out a lot of information. What type of cancer did her dad have? Was he doing any other treatments? How long had he been doing those other treatments? Okay, so if this over-the-counter herbal remedy cured his cancer, what was the indication of those? How much was he taking? When was he taking them? Was he taking them in a regimen? She gave him none of this information. And the man also wasn't asking for supplements. He wanted to know about fasting. But that's the idea of an N of 1. I have an anecdote of someone who was cured from something by doing this one thing. There are so many factors to our health. So for myself, when someone tells me that something really worked for someone they knew and I should try it or my child should try it, I always take that with a grain of salt, because you don't know someone else's medical history. And they don't know you or your child's medical history. So I always talk to a doctor or try to find some scientific research on that particular subject. Okay, so next I want to talk about good science versus bad science. This is pretty easy. Did the researchers follow a scientific method? Science has to be repeatable and testable. And when someone follows a scientific method for researching a question, it allows other people to repeat that same lab work. And someone in Cape Verde in Africa can do the same thing as someone in New York. And do they get the same results? That's really important in science. It can't just be something that only happens in one lab one time and no one can ever repeat it again, because then that's not a scientific principle. And then also, we want to make sure that people are safe. Are our researchers using best judgment and best practices when dealing with human subjects? Are they keeping their subjects safe? And that's actually found in the methods section. And sometimes in the introduction, they will also state, we did this research with the express permission of the doctors of, Mount Sinai Hospital in New York City. There's usually a council of people that decide whether or not scientific research can even go forward on human test subjects. And it might be years before a certain trial is even allowed to be used on humans. First they'll certainly test with like rats or tissue samples before they ever get to a human subject. But that's something to pay attention to as well. And if it's in a reputable scientific journal, then yes, you better believe they used a human, they had rules for the use of human subjects. So questions that I personally ask when someone comes to me and says, you should try this for your son are, and this, your questions might be different, but the questions that I ask are, is this treatment safe? And you might think, I don't know if it's safe, but what I mean by that is that, take for example, there's a protocol out that a lot of people are using, especially in my state of Arizona, that suggests you use a gluten-free diet, olive oil, inulin, and fish oil to help their child's symptoms of autism, or I shouldn't even say that, it's not symptoms of autism, it's symptoms of kind of comorbid issues with autism. And my question is it safe? Well, I know that a gluten-free diet is safe because I know people who have been on gluten-free diets for years, so I'm not afraid of trying that out with my son. Olive oil, that's safe. I mean, as long as he's not chugging a bottle of it a day, it's probably safe. I love olive oil. I eat it on a lot of my food. Inulin, that's a type of fiber. I take inulin myself, so I feel safe giving that to my son. Fish oil, everyone knows the importance of omega-3 fatty acids for brain health. There's nothing wrong with it there. So for me, that is a safe treatment. Is it going to work for my son? I don't know, but I feel safe doing that treatment for him. I also ask myself, is this treatment kind? And now I don't mean, is he uncomfortable? We were just talking about taking our children to the dentist. Sometimes that makes my son uncomfortable, but I know that the benefits outweigh his uncomfortableness. So I don't mean it doesn't make him uncomfortable. I mean, is it kind? How would I feel sitting in that chair, doing that activity or taking these medications? If I feel like the benefits outweigh the risks, then I'll let my son do it. If I see that it's harming his self-esteem or it's causing undue pain, I'm not going to do it. I just, for myself, I can't do that. Does the child enjoy it or not mind it, right? Kids are not going to love everything that we are asking them to do. I personally hated school for most of my education until I got into graduate school. But it was good for me. It's created the life that I have. So all I want to know is, and as a bonus, does my child actually enjoy it? So if he doesn't mind it and he actually enjoys it, we're going to do this. We're going to do whatever it is. And it's helping him. For me, my outlook on it is our children only get one childhood. And I don't want my child to have a miserable childhood. And his childhood isn't going to look like a typical childhood, right? Our kids are going to have a different childhood than us and a different childhood than other peers. But I want him to have a good one, as good as it can be. So aside from science, those are the ways that I evaluate treatments and behavioral interventions. So in the end, I think I hope that you go out and use some of these tips to evaluate all the studies that you're probably inundated with. But in the end, trust your gut and listen to your child. If you are fortunate enough to have a child that is able to communicate with you, then if they say they hate something, like really hate it, and you can tell that they are being psychically somehow hurt by this or emotionally hurt by this, listen to them or negotiate with them, and trust your gut. If you think that something is off, you know the best about your child. And that is all I have about basic reading of scientific articles. Oh, wait, I'm so sorry. I wanted to give you a list, a very important list of the top 6 scientific articles or scientific journals to do. I'm sorry I didn't write it out on the list, but the #1 medical journal that is most trusted and has the best rigorous peer review is the New England Journal of Medicine. So that is an American publication. The second, which is the most cited in the world, that means the most people, researchers look to this particular journal to gather information when they're doing their research. It's called Nature. So the first one, New England Journal of Medicine. Nature is number 2. The Lancet, Lancet, which has to do with global health. So if you want to look at research from around the world, not just English-speaking countries, the Lancet is one that is really great to look at. The British Medical Journal, so that of course is published in English and it's highly, highly respected. And then another American one, the Journal of the American Medical Association. That one I actually read a lot from. They have a lot of really great research on autism specifically. And then, because you may hit a paywall, that is unfortunate with journal articles, but here's a free one. It's called the Annals of Internal Medicine. And that's a really great resource as well. And that is absolutely free. Everything that they publish, you can find online and get copies of. Another tip or trick, if someone sends you a journal article or the title of a journal article or the author of a journal article, and you look it up online and suddenly you're being asked to pay $120 to read the article or $75 for a subscription to this journal where you want to read one 5-page article, you can often email the main author or one of the authors that are listed, because that will be listed, and they'll often send you a copy because, again, scientists want people to read their work. They want people to know about the results of their experimentations. So that's a little tip. You can email them directly and say, I'd really like a copy of this journal article and I cannot afford a subscription to this journal, or I'm not a scholar, I'm a mom, I think it would really help me. Email them and they will, I'm sure, 9 times out of 10, they will just email you back the article and probably even maybe get into a discussion with you about their research, because researchers love to talk about their research. That's why we do it. Okay, so thank you so much for allowing me to jabber on at you for 30 minutes. Oh, and listening to Dominic screaming in the background. Again, Michelle, as she mentioned, has asked me to do a regular vlog series talking about science, talking about different treatments or therapies for our children. And I am really interested in not only delving into research about autism, but research about other special needs issues. So please email us with all of your questions. And then if you want to delve into more of research that I am more of an expert in, I really like looking at evolutionary theories about autism spectrum disorders and cross-cultural thoughts and treatments about ASD. ASD is not treated the same way cross-culturally around the world. One little tidbit, in the US, eye contact is seen as something that's extremely important. And once a child on the spectrum starts to have better eye contact, they're seen as, overcoming an issue. In other countries, eye contact isn't a big deal. In fact, the kids on the spectrum are seen as very polite for not looking people in the eye. So that's just a little tidbit and a different way of looking at some of the things we believe about autism. Okay, so Michelle, I'll let you take it back. Oh, Michelle, your microphone's off.
Hello? Better? Okay. I was wondering if you could list the 6 journal articles again. One of the participants only got 5.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, I'm sorry. I needed to put that on the slide, and I really didn't. But the most trusted is the New England Journal of Medicine. The second one is the most cited in the world, and that one is Nature. If you want to look at global health, which I find really fascinating, that's the Lancet, Lancet. It's British published, but it's really looking at global health. And I've read a few articles about autism spectrum disorders in different societies and how they're treated through them. The British Medical Journal is the fourth. And then the Journal of the American Medical Association. And then the free one, and I know, Michelle, you have a link to some other free journals, but this free one is the Annals, ANNALS, of Internal Medicine.
Awesome. Okay. Another question that we got, and I actually ran into this too, was that I went into a therapy place, right? And they promised this cure, and it kind of sounded very hinky, my science flares were kind of going off. And when I asked them, to see their peer-reviewed journal articles, they said, well, we have great testimonials in the hallway. So what's the difference does that go back to your N of 1?
Yeah.
That's kind of what a testimonial is, right?
That's exactly what I would say. On the other hand, as a social scientist, people's stories are very important. So I can't discount people's lived experiences. So I want to make that clear too. But at the same time, if it's a treatment I'm going to use on my child, I need a little bit more. I need to know that 50 children, 70 children have experienced positive outcomes, and that other scientists or other people in the field, other therapists, the people who have credentials, have evaluated this service. So, that's still, when you went to them, that's still that service saying, oh, we're great. Unfortunately, for our special needs kiddos, it is a business model, okay? Their treatments have become a business model. And not that these people aren't altruistic. All of my son's therapists have been lovely people that really want the best for him. But at the same time, they're also selling you on their specific type of treatment. So, yeah, I would want to see the science. I would want to see, is this replicable in other children and in other places? Are you the only clinic that can do this therapy?
Yeah.
So
I have a question, because like you said, I'm a hard scientist. So we did lots of studies in a lab. We can control everything. We have our control group, we have our negatives, we have our positives. Like everything is like really pretty, But when you go into the social sciences, I find that as I read these articles, it gets harder and harder to get that ideal scenario, especially when it comes to like your sample population. And it gets extremely hard sometimes, it seems like, to get a negative control group, because a lot of families that take place in these studies don't want to have their son or their daughter not get anything.
Right, a placebo. Yeah, right. Who wants to get the placebo? Absolutely, yes. And and I mentioned that in the social sciences, we use a scientific method when applicable. So there are certain times when you just can't have a control group. My research was on, homeless teenagers. So I can't. It was hard to find a control group. What does that mean? You can't have a clean control group for something like that. Yeah, it is difficult in social sciences. And in fact, my advisor constantly petitions for anthropology to not be considered a science. I don't know who she's petitioning to, but that is her argument.
So then what would you say is the best thing to look out for then? To know, like, okay, maybe you can't have a really great control group. Then what are we looking for as safeguards to know that what their study is showing isn't just a placebo effect, but that there's something real going on there?
I would look at whether or not other groups are replicating what's happening. So you go to a place for therapy or treatment, and then you find out who else is doing this treatment. Is someone in Cincinnati doing this treatment? Is another treatment center doing these behavioral interventions in Australia? And then find out what their data looks like. because again, that sample size, you're just making a more concrete picture of sample size. And your gut cannot be discounted. If you walk in and you're just like, this is not going to work, or this is not going to work for my child, that's another important factor. This is just not going to work for my child. It may work for your child. It may work for that kid.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point. I think they've identified over, we talk a lot about autism because both of our kids have autism. But I think the research has shown they've discovered over 100 different kinds of autism. So it's like, just because this research is really, really great and, maybe it works for this person or this subset of children, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work for you. And that's okay.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. I think that was my only question. My only other question that was like my personal question, because I'm like, tell me more about the social sciences. Sometimes I don't know how to do this. Okay, awesome. And so for people who are watching at home, up here we have the webinar is up here, so you can download this file. We also posted 2 other links here that are just, kind of more background information. Again, just more kind of questions to ask yourselves as you read scientific journal articles. And I thought that Angela had a really great point about how to get them, because sometimes I get stuck on how to get them too. When you're in academia, you're like, yeah, because I'm a nerd. I'm like, yeah, I can read every article known to man because I have access. But when you're not anymore, it's really hard sometimes to get those journal articles. So I think emailing the authors is such a great thing to do, and a great resource to getting access to those articles. So that was a really great piece of information.
And I really think 9 times out of 10, the researchers are going to be so happy that you contacted them, because again, science does not happen in a vacuum. We want people to know. We want people to read our stuff. Look what I did, So, and also I just want to really say, all members of D.A.M.E.S, please ask us questions for the vlog series. Between Michelle's hard science knowledge and my social science knowledge, I think we're really going to be able to answer some questions and make it easy to understand and digestible.
And you can send those to Michelle with 1 L, because my parents are difficult. So Michele at DAMESUSA.com, and then just put in the subject line, what's the science question? And as soon as I get those in, I will just parse them out between myself and Angela. Mostly Angela's going to take the reins of this, but we'll help you kind of weed through what your question is and try to get you some solid answers. Okay, and I think we're done. Thank you so much, Angela. Thank you, Dominic.
Thank you. I appreciate it.